Welcome into another edition of Tampa 2. Casey Phillips here with staff writer Brianna Dix. We have a tough loss to talk about coming off the Eagles game, but then we have a very exciting rivalry game to talk about. So there is a lot to cover today. As usual, we'll start with sort of our takeaways from the previous game, which I feel a little bit like Todd Bowles, where he said that there were things that he thought right after the game were worse than they actually were once he reviewed the film. And I feel the same way. I feel like we've all sort of come to a place of like, you know what, that didn't feel great in the moment.
Let's put that behind.
Yep, but I think that there's a lot of things that they've been able to say that are all fixable, and then also giving credit to the Eagles, that knowing that they really are an incredible team, and there's the just what they're really good at versus what we still have to work on. And I think that both things can be true, and I think that it feels like the whole team feels better once they were able to look back at the film, think about it, and also to have the short week and move on quickly. It just feels like everyone's like, okay, you know what? We learned a lot from that. That was very helpful. We don't love how it turned out, but it feels manageable as compared to sometimes when you lose, and especially on, prime time or things like that, it can feel so much worse. It can feel heavier, harder to come back from. And somehow this doesn't feel like one of those.
Right.
So
and even Dave Canales and Baker were really emphasizing that it was fundamental things. It's easy fixes, things that they can quickly come back from, fix, and then be ready to go against the Saints. So I do feel like, it's the 24-hour rule seems to kind of be going around, that they've immediately put it in the rear view and they're ready to take on a divisional foe.
Yeah, and in a short week, it almost feels like a 12-hour rule. It feels like you don't even get the full 24 hours to think about it. So for you, what were the biggest things offensively that you took away from that Eagles game?
Well, overall, I would say the Eagles just dominated the line of scrimmage. They dominated time of possession, and really offensively for the Bucs, you kind of saw the sluggish start. Again, they were ineffective on first down, which put them in 3rd and long. They didn't make the Eagles have to take into account for their run game by adding extra guys in the box. Didn't really have that balanced attack. And, they only had one rushing first down the entire game and were outgained by nearly 300 yards. That's never a good sign. They led that methodical, 75-yard drive in the fourth quarter, capped off by Mike Evans. But, against the Saints, they're really going to have to just start fast.
Yeah, I think for me, the run game, both sides of the ball was kind of the story of the game, right? And they're not going to want games where you're having 41 rushing yards. That's just not, unless you are really just lighting it up through the air, you're not going to want that to be your stat. But I did think it was interesting that they stayed committed to it. And I'm sure that there are some discussions and dissension out there about whether or not that was the right idea. That I think a lot of people think, look, it's not working, you got to leave it. But the whole point is you've got to stay balanced. Like you just have to. And I know it's tough, but you got to stay committed to that, because if they know you're just going to start throwing, well, then that's not going to be available either. So you have to keep defenses honest. And I think that the fact that they stayed committed to it is a good sign for moving forward. If this is something they are committed to, they are going to get it fixed, because it is something that is so important. It is a big part of what Coach had said, that why he brought Dave Canales in here was this whole idea of this balanced approach. You got to be on the field longer to give your defense some breathers. You need that run game to stay out there. I did feel like it was nice to see that Baker still, there's a consistent theme of him looking really good when he rolls out, gets into space a bit, his ability to extend plays some. I think that's a really encouraging thing that I saw. I do feel like it'll be interesting to see if they're able to find ways to target Otten and Palmer a little bit more, and even Godwin a bit, that I just feel like in general, and part of it is, again, we just haven't had the number of plays even we would want. Canales has brought that up of like, if you look at the percent of our plays that we're doing different things, it's good. It just doesn't end up feeling like you're doing very much, because you just don't have as many plays or have the ball as long as you want. You're not getting these long drives. But I just felt like they weren't quite as involved in the game as I would have thought or maybe hoped for. I think that, and especially the idea of the shift in that first game to this game, and the first 2 games to this game of we hadn't turned the ball over, and then we did, and it was the worst times. There's no good time to turn the ball over. Let's be clear about that. But it felt like, especially when they were coming right off of us, getting turnovers and not able to capitalize, and the momentum shift that it was of Like it just felt,
self-inflicted
it felt like the worst part of that. And especially when you were still getting turnovers, that you were forcing turnovers from an Eagles team that, in a way that I thought was really impressive. And it was just so sad that they weren't able to capitalize that on a little bit more. How about your defensive takeaways?
Well, as you mentioned, I think the biggest storyline was their inability to stop the run. The Eagles put up 201 yards. And it's one of those things with coming in, you knew they were going to run it. You knew that is their identity, the RPOs and all of that, and they were still able to have success. DeAndre Swift kind of served as the beneficiary of that. But even the tackles in space, A.J. Brown consistently put up the yak yardage. Kind of the threat of that RPO kind of made guys flow off the line of scrimmage, which kind of they consistently gained the yards before contact. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest things against the Saints is how are they able to bounce back this week, and how are they able to with their weapons, with Alvin Kamara and with Rashid Shaheed, like how are they able to minimize those guys?
Yeah, the run game, that was the big storyline. I did think it was encouraging that we held them to 1 of 5 in the red zone. I thought that was really impressive and exciting, and especially knowing that the one that they did give up was that famous Philadelphia play that is so hard to stop. That's a bit of a unique thing as well. That the defense held up well in the red zone. And it's only the 5th time that Jalen Hurts has thrown multiple interceptions in a game. Like that's a big deal to be able to force those as well. I just think that was, at least there were some encouraging things about being able to stop a very prolific offense. And I agree. I think it seems like some of it is just some fundamental stuff like the tackling that I know. And I thought that our backups that had to go in really stepped up in some big ways. I thought that Zion McCollum, Dee Delaney, even Greg Gaines, guys that, are not your prototypical guys you're hearing their names called or on the stat sheet. I thought that was really great to see that against one of the top teams in the league in prime time, you get thrown into the mix in some of these ways, and you're hearing some of those names. I also thought it was great to see Ryan Neal making some big plays that, when that big tackle for the stop on 4th and 1. And I think that there were just some really encouraging things as well.
Well, they had a great start. It's one of those, and that game was kind of the depiction of why you can see it's important for us to run the ball and to be stubborn in that aspect, because you see how it wears down a defense. And to start the game, they had a lot of success. They held them to only 3 points, considering how long they were on the field, their long drives. But then as the Eagles kind of started gaining the steam, it wears them down. And then, they had over 70 offensive plays. That's going to take a toll on the defense.
That is really going to take a toll, that's for sure. And also, we should shout out special teams. We need to talk about the fact that Jake Camarda, NFC,
the leg man,
the NFC Special Teams Player of the Month. I love this. First Bucs punter to win that award since 2005. Wow. It's a big deal. So congratulations to Jake. Very excited for him. It has been great to see that he and McLaughlin have both been really solid so far.
That they have.
I know coverage teams, they're going to be looking at that this week, and especially knowing that the Saints, you have Rashid Shaheed, who just returned that 76-yard punt for a touchdown, that this is a team that the Saints are known for having some pretty good special teams consistently throughout the years. So to know that we're going to have to really button down on the coverage teams, because that is not a place you want to give up a lot of field position or yardage in those ways that, when you have especially a guy like Camarda that's really doing a great job of giving you the ability to flip the field. You don't want to hurt that. So now, how about a injury update? As we talked about, that was quite a bit of a storyline this last week, and you and I might have to sign up to be defensive backs.
Right. Well, it's definitely been the story is the injury to the secondary with Jamel Dean with Carlton Davis, but I think one of the positives of the week is that Carlton Davis was a full participant, and we're doing this on Friday morning, so we haven't gotten the injury report for Friday, but on Thursday, Carlton Davis was a full participant. And then Devin White, I thought it was interesting. He kind of showed up with a new foot injury this week, but he was a limited participant.
That was so interesting. We were all expecting to see him on the injury report.
or the groin last week, and then all of a sudden it's, foot, okay. But he was limited, and then Jamel Dean, Kalijah Cansey, and Vita Vea were still non-participants on Thursday. So those will definitely be 3 to watch, and if Jamel Dean is still not able to go, which kind of dealing with that neck shoulder injury, then we could very well see Zion McCollum having his 3rd start.
Yep, man, he's getting a lot of experience. That's for sure. All right, so how about let's flip into the Saints game, and let's start with our position group that we're excited to watch in this game for offense.
I am going to go with receiver. I think, there's been a lot of talk about the Saints secondary. Marshawn Lattimore, Alontae Taylor lead the league in passes defense and also forced incompletions. So I think it's going to be, they play a lot of man coverage, which is just a testament to how the Saints feel about their lockdown corners in those one-on-one matchups. So I think it'll be interesting to see how both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, the variations in the routes, the subtle maneuvers to get that separation and what that kind of ends up looking like on Sunday.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really fun to watch. And for me, I picked the offensive line because I want to see us have a bounce back game with the run game. I think that the team needs that.
Yes.
And I'm not even saying it has to be where you're running for, 200 yards like the Eagles did, but just a game that you feel good about it and maybe break one open.
Right.
Like you need one
have those
bigger
plows
run.
For like 8 or 10 yards.
Yeah, that see your yards per carry go up a little bit. I just think the team needs a bit of a bounce back game when it comes to that. And also knowing that, the Saints defensive front, year in, year out, they're always stout. Guys like Cam Jordan and what they're going to be able to do, Demario Davis even, like you just know that they're going to test you. And then you go into one of the hardest places to play in terms of noise and is your communication up to par? Again, this is still a fairly new group to playing together. We saw that when they went to Minnesota, they did such a great job in terms of no pre-snap penalties, and that was so impressive. And can you repeat that at another hostile, loud, indoor place?
Right.
So to see how well they communicate, how well they handle that front, and can you open up some holes to get some of those plays to make you feel like, all right, yes, like this run game, we have the ability to do this, keep that Saints defense from being able to keep you off the field and give the ball to them a whole lot. How about position group to watch on defense?
I'm going to go with the defensive line. I think pressure is going to be really key this week. And obviously, last week against the Eagles, they kind of imposed their will on both sides of the line up front. So I think this week, I really, especially with the way the Saints, getting Alvin Kamara back, how they're able to kind of shut that down. And I think that starts up front and not letting them break to the second level. And even with some of their guys in space, I think it's going to be a really big week for the Bucs D-line.
And depending on, again, who's available even and how healthy everybody is. Because I think that we saw this last week that there's always a difference in are you playing versus are you your full self? Because we saw Devin White have to pull up, with that interception. We saw, we know Vita Vea had been on the injury report, still on it. So we know that means he wasn't playing at 100%. And that's always the challenging thing is what percent of yourself are you and can you still make the same kind of dominant plays, and then is it the starter who's maybe at 80%, and then, or are you throwing in your backup because they're more of 100%? I always think that's a really interesting decision that coaches have to make.
And just kind of the rotation, having to try and get that continuity when guys are moving in and out.
So I decided to go with our corners.
Okay.
Because I don't know who that's going to be, and just in general, like who's playing and what is that going to look like, and how much is it your starters, how much is it your backups, and how much can everybody step up? Because the Saints, Bucs fans have seen Michael Thomas for years. We know what he's capable of, and then they have just been so fortunate with their little wide receiver drafts recently. And Chris Olave, just what an entrance into the league. So consistent for them. And then now you have Rashid Shaheed, and his speed is wild. Wild. So to have three guys that are weapons, that is a lot. And so that's a tough task. And then now that it looks like it's going to be Jameis Winston, again, as of us recording this, no official announcement has been made, but they've, all indications are that they're going to be probably giving Jameis the reins this week. We know that he's a guy that likes to take shots, right? And sometimes that has meant interceptions. Sometimes that's meant big plays. He led all sorts of yardage categories when he was here for a reason, that this is a guy that he can make plays. And are you able to, and we saw that, when we played the Saints and, Jamel got those interceptions, that there was all those turnovers forced, that the game had been just 3-3, this game last year, it was this slog. And then that's what really ended up sealing it for the Bucs, was getting some of these interceptions, forcing those mistakes. So are your corners able to cover, well enough, are able to maybe get some of those interceptions, some of those big game-changing plays. I think that, we know that Jameis can sometimes leave that available there. He has turned it over less since becoming a Saint. But I just think knowing those wide receivers are down there, he's a guy that wants to make the big play, and it can go one of two very different directions. That it can be an interception, it can be a huge play. So, I think the corners are going to be really interesting to watch. And again, do they limit the yak? I think that's a really big thing to see. Is that Coach made it sound like, especially guys like D. Delaney, he was like, they did really well in coverage for the most part, and they'd be able to stop. They'd be there in a position to make the stop for only a 4 or 5 yard gain. But then we didn't tackle, and all of a sudden it turns into a 15, 20-yard gain. So can you just get those fundamentals where the guys are going to get some catches, but are you limiting it to it's only a 5-yard catch? It's not these bigger plays. All right, so how about a player to watch, a one-on-one matchup to watch?
I'm going to go with defense for the Bucs. I'm going to go with Lavonte David against Alvin Kamara, and then I'm going to go with Zion McCollum against Rashid Shaheed. I think is going to be a big one. But for Lavonte, I think Alvin Kamara coming back off the 3 game suspension, he's certainly going to be a focal point for the Saints. And he's a guy that even a lot of the coaches have talked about this week, he can do it all. He's not limited. He's that triple threat. He can run between the tackles with power. He has the shiftiness in space and kind of the elusiveness for the perimeter. He's a lethal pass catcher, has like a big route tree, isn't limited to just those quick little running back routes or like the hitches or the curls. I mean, he has an enhanced route tree. So how are they able to limit him? And of course, Lavonte David is one of the best off-ball linebackers in the league. So of course, he'll probably, if they put Kamara in the slot, he'll be tasked with kind of shutting him down. But also, Kamara is a big element to the Saints screen game. And I love how the coaches refer to Lavonte David as a screen sniffer. And he's a guy that his read and reaction skills, the instinctiveness, his play recognition, but also just his ability to stonewall rushers is really impressive. So I think he's going to be really big. And then Rashid Shaheed is a guy that, just like you mentioned, the yak yardage, he's kind of their jet sweep, their reverse guys, able to pick up those yards. He's averaging 16.9 yards per reception. Jeez. That is just insane. That's ridiculous. And Zion McCollum is a guy that he has that speed element. That's one of his big strengths. He's patient in phase, so I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be really, really big this week, especially with kind of the yards they gave up to A.J. Brown last week. Kind of how are they able to corral the guys this week, because Rashid Shaheed is that guy that's kind of the complement to Michael Thomas, to Chris Olave. All of those threats, it's like pick your poison, because if you go towards kind of limiting one, well, then that creates advantageous matchups for the other guys. So kind of how are they able to limit those on Sunday? What about you?
Yeah, and Lavonte, man, I mean, he's just still playing at such an elite level. And I think it's easy to forget sometimes that, like, there are just not that many guys playing the position he does, at the age he does, at the level he does, so consistently. I mean, I think he led the team with, 13 tackles this last week. And it's funny, I had Coach Foote on the radio show last week, and I was kind of even asking him, like, what is it like to coach a guy that, like, does he need coaching? Do you coach Lavonte? I feel like he just knows everything at this point. He's done everything. And he was like, yeah, I don't say his name a lot. Yeah. I don't have to do just a whole lot. And I was like,
mentoring, perhaps.
Yeah, like, just kind of like, good job, Lavonte, keep that up. That was really good.
Do that.
Keep doing more of that. And it is so true. I mean, and what a leader, what a locker room guy. And I do think he's exactly the kind of guy in a game like the Saints game that is so important, because he keeps his head about him so well.
Yes.
And he doesn't always let the emotions get the better of him. He is just consistent. He is the same. And that is exactly the kind of guy you want right there in the middle of your defense in a very heated rivalry division game.
It always is.
So on my defensive side, I similarly picked based kind of on Kamara. I said Vita. The idea of the Vita versus Kamara, and also, frankly, even Vita versus Jameis, that I just kind of thought of in general. I feel like Vita is such a linchpin part of this, because he is someone who is capable of stopping the run so well and also rushing the passer so well from his position. And he's the guy that can just, eat up all these blockers, which is going to help everyone else around there. Because I think you're going to need to get some pressure on Jameis. Because you also, again, if your corners are hurt, you don't want to make them cover a super long time. You don't want to let him sit back there, create, dance around, whatever. You're going to want to get pressure quickly. And then same thing with the run game. You're going to want to know that you at least have that middle plugged up and that they're not gashing you, these quick runs up the middle. And it did just feel like it's not like Vita didn't play a good game, but you could just tell he wasn't quite himself maybe, that, when guys are hurt, that's what happens. And with him being on the injury report again, I'm like, is he Vita? Is he the Vita that he is capable of being? And knowing how important that's going to be to get in Jameis's face, therefore make him maybe throw up a little bit more over him, uncomfortable back leg throws, more hang time, more chance for people to get some of those interceptions and plays that we're talking about, and make Kamara have to do a little bit more of the screen stuff and not feel like he can just run, right up there through the middle. So Vita was my pick for the defensive side. For the offensive side, I had to go Mike Evans, right? I felt like that I was like, do I even put this? Because it feels so obvious that when I was thinking about the offensive one-on-one, it's Mike Evans versus Lattimore.
Grab your popcorn for that one.
Let's be honest. Everyone loves watching that matchup. It's just and
it gets so chippy.
It does.
It's just that pure
and
football,
I get it.
The rivalry.
I think anyone that's played sports probably had their Lattimore. Like everyone has their someone that it was just like,
on the calendar.
We just don't get along very well. And Mike is a guy he's so competitive in everything.
Yes.
And the question is always, of course, can we all keep our heads about ourselves?
Yes.
Can we not have any flags thrown? Can we not have any of that? Can we harness that competitiveness in a way that just elevates your game? Because Mike is a guy that as things get more heated, as they get more competitive, he ups his game. He wants to do even more, like whatever it takes. And then it's just, again, can you stop just short of where it becomes a penalty or a problem?
Right.
And so I think that's what I'm going to be watching. And of course, it's Mike thinks about it. Everyone talks to him about it. Everybody knows. And I also think that coming off this last game, again, Mike had 60 yards, a touchdown. It was not a bad game. But for Mike, he expected more out of himself. That he said that there were some of those, things that he didn't catch that he felt like he should have, even though they weren't gimmies. It's not like it just was this easy hitting him in the chest kind of thing. They were catches that Mike expects himself to make. And you saw as the game went on, even he was like, all right, turned it up more. Like that last drive, circus one-handed catch, getting the touchdown, that he really upped things. And I feel like there's maybe still, he has that bitterness from this last week of the loss and then some of those drops. He has that chip on his shoulder, and I will always pick Mike Evans with a chip on his shoulder, and even hearing Baker talk about how he felt like they wanted to be more aggressive, that he's like, man, our defense is so good that we have the chance to be aggressive and try to take things to them early on. I can see where that ends up being a Baker Mayfield to Mike Evans, maybe some of those deep ball shots earlier in the game, try to get that rolling. Yeah. I just feel like the attitude that Baker seemed to have after the game too, it's like, man, we gotta shoot our shot a little bit more here. And, Canales did say that, if you look at our percentage of plays, we're taking deep shots the amount of times you want to. It wasn't necessarily about the rates of it, but maybe even just connecting on it earlier. And then, of course, that's going to let you have more plays to do it more often, just holding the ball a little bit more. All right, so let's talk about our quote of the week. And right before the show, we both just decided to share which one we'd chosen, and we chose, I think, the same one. So, which is amazing. Of all the people that talked all week and all the things
quotes
that were
we could have
said,
chosen, same one.
So I think it shows we picked a good one. So tell us the quote.
But it was a quote from Dave Canales on the run mentality. And he said, I think Coach Bowles is making a good statement there about what he sees from the flow of a game. I think a part of the mentality we are trying to establish here is if you're a running team who throws play action for those guys, for the line, for the tight ends, for the receivers on blocks, for the running backs, it's got to have an aggressive mindset. We're not where we need to be as a group with that mindset running the ball yet.
Oh, I love this. We actually didn't pick the same one, so this is great. They're there we go. They're both about the run game, but they're slightly different. So this is perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me what you liked about that.
But I love how, because when you think about it, it's very easy to just look at the simplicity of what your preconceived idea of the run is, and just, it's the offensive line getting pushed, it's the running back letting blocks develop, hitting the hole. But there's so much that goes into the run game with the blocking, looking at the protections, looking at potential double teams, but also it's all hands on deck. It's the receivers with the stalk blocks. It's the tight ends with the chips. It's all of these things coming together, and it has to be cohesive. And so I loved the fact that he said, we're not quite there yet, but as these guys continue to get reps, and I mean, people also have to think that, this offensive line, you have 4 starters at different positions. You had Luke Gedeke, who switched to the right side. You have Tristan Wirfs, who switched to the left side. You have a rookie in Cody Mauch. You have all of these different pieces that are still trying to gain that synergy. And also, Rachaad White's in a new system. Now you have the wide, you have the mid, you have the duo, you have all of these things. And a lot of them are things that he played at Arizona State, but he didn't really have the duo there. So still kind of working together to get all of these pieces, but also just to create that mentality from the quarterback to the offensive line to the tight ends to all of these guys, that we have to be aggressive, we have to hit them in the mouth, and we have to be able to run the ball, to be able to open up those the play action, the boots, and all of these things that Baker Mayfield thrives in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's great. Mine was very similar. It was right off that, and it's because you mentioned the run game mentality was your quote, and he talks about that in the first sentence of mine, but I chose a slightly different part of it.
Love it.
So he said, at this point now it's just about building the right mentality in the run game, and for the players it's reps. It's seeing the mid zone, seeing the downhill stuff, seeing the gun runs, and kind of feeling where those voids are going to be. I think that'll help to really boost Rachaad White's confidence in being decisive in some of the runs. I think, again, that's just a rep thing. At this point in 3 games, we have to continue to stay with it, and I think one thing you'll learn is I'm going to be a little bit stubborn about running that ball and having that balance. It's not going to be that we're just going to run it every time, but in our self-scout up to this point, it's been a good balance. I think we'll continue to improve as they get more reps and more rhythm with the runs. Mm-hmm. So I love the part about I'm going to be stubborn with this. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to run the ball. Right. It's just not a question. Mm-hmm. And so I liked that he said, I'm going to be stubborn about this, and that he was like, you know what, I really think it is just about reps, that they just need to figure some of this out. And talked about Rachaad's confidence in being decisive in some of it too, that, I know Rachaad said after the game he felt like there are times he's just trying to do too much.
Right.
And Bowles kind of said a similar thing, that he's trying to make these big plays, which that's the kind of stuff that can lead to some fumbles, or that can lead to you not hitting holes because you're trying to see what, make the big play and not just take this little thing that they're giving you. So I think that that's going to be a really good thing to learn. And it's funny, we all talked about how much we hated how early the bye week was this year. And I'm sure, and it does suck from an injury standpoint of you always kind of want later in the year to be at your healthiest, going into trying to make a playoff run, all that stuff. However, I will say that I think it is reasonable that this year is not as bad for it to be as early, because you do have this whole new system. To be able to have that time to really, as he mentioned, self-scout.
Right.
And to take stock in all of it, I think that's really actually kind of helpful after 4 games, because I think people remember that the Super Bowl year, you had same thing. You have this new quarterback coming in, new pieces, all this stuff, and it didn't click until the bye week, that there was a very big shift in what happened with that offense pre-bye week and post-bye week. Now, they were fortunate enough that the bye week was later, and they were fortunate enough that they'd hung in enough that wasn't too late.
Yeah.
But I think that in some ways it can be nice to have that bye week, to have the chance to take stock of this run game and say, all right, let's hone in on this, figure out exactly what needs to be done. All right, so we'll close with our human interest piece. This is where I always say something about one of the guys off the field.
Yes.
This one I chose mainly because I'm a fan of The Office. And it was, news came out this last week that there's a chance they're rebooting the show, which my heart did 1,000 cartwheels. Yep. There's a chance. It's like a very.
This is the first I'm hearing of
Yep,
this.
You're welcome. This is the news we bring you on Tampa 2.
My goodness.
So Matt Filer, our big offensive lineman, I enjoyed this. used an Office reference to announce his pregnancy with his wife a little while back, and it was a onesie for the baby that said assistant to the regional manager. And I enjoyed that. And I found out his college was only an hour away from Scranton. And so he is just this very big fan. And I just kind of was thinking about this school and how many times our front office loves these D2 smaller school offensive linemen. And I just wanted to shout out Matt Filer for being from Bloomsburg University, D2. And this week, Allie Marpet on our show just said how consistent he has found Matt Filer to be. That when he's watched these games, and I'm like, I trust Allie's opinion on that particular position. And he just said, he's like, man, I can't believe this guy has bounced around in the league a little bit because he just seems so consistent. So I just kind of wanted to shout out Matt Filer for that, and also give that I loved his pregnancy announcement being Office related. Going to school by Scranton.
I would have gone with a Dunder Mifflin
shirt today. There you go. Yeah. All right, that is going to do it for us on this edition of Tampa 2. Thank you so much for joining in, and we'll be back next time to break down that Saints game.